leader without followers is just taking a walk. You think you're going somewhere, but nobody is with you. Every good leader knows that. There is no such thing as leadership without relationships. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We've been in this series called Born to Lead, where we recognize that you guys each have areas of your life where God has given you responsibility and leadership. And we've spent 3 other weeks talking about leadership. We talked about the what of leadership. We talked about what breaks your heart. And then we spent 2 weeks on the how of leadership. How do we turn obstacles into opportunities? And how do we stay focused on the essential instead of the urgent? And today we are going to talk about the who of leadership. Who is with me? If you missed these previous weeks, I really recommend that you go back and listen to them. They're incredible. They're going to give you some really great tips on how to be a great leader. But today we're going to talk about the who of leadership, because leadership without relationships is not leadership at all. We must understand this, because without it, we're just like Jerry Maguire. I mean, can you imagine if he had just said, "Who's with me?" and no one came, right? It would end the movie. None of us would ever have watched it. Those of you that are young, you should go back and watch it. It's really cute. There's a great love story. You complete me. It's amazing. But I know most of you haven't seen it. But we started this series asking the question, what breaks your heart? And we're going to end this series with a question too. And this question is the question that all good leaders have asked themselves, because this is the question that leadership demands be answered. And that question is, who are my people? Who am I in relationship with? Are you surprised? Did you think the question was, what's my title? What's my power? What's my responsibility, right? We ask those questions. Do I have the authority to lead? Those are questions that we ask ourselves, but that's actually not the most important question. Those things can start our leadership. They can propel us for the short term, but they can't sustain us in the long term. The only way to lead long term is to have people along with you. We need one another. And there is no such thing as leadership without relationships. And this is certainly true in the book of Nehemiah, where we've been going through the book of Nehemiah, looking at the story of Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And God called Nehemiah to guide an entire community of people to rebuild these walls. His heart was broken for Jerusalem. He wanted to do something about it. God gave him a vision. He gave him a plan, but God didn't stop there. You see, God resourced his vision. He gave him the provision for the vision, and the provision for the vision was found in his people. God does this. He uses the people around us to resource our vision. But we don't always love that, right? Because what does that mean? It means that we need people. And we don't always love that, right? Our default is independence. Our default is wanting to do it ourselves. Our default is not wanting to need anyone else. Or it is, at least for me. I can be like, I got this. I mean, I have carried 3 kids myself in my hands and done all kinds of crazy things because I don't want to ask for help. But can you imagine if Nehemiah had done that? If Nehemiah came and he was like, all right, guys, I'm passionate about rebuilding the wall. I'm going to do it myself. And he just left in the middle of the night. And now the king's wondering what happened to his cupbearer. And he shows up at the wall and he starts stacking one stone on one stone on one stone. He would be there for 300 years if he wouldn't have been taken out before then. It never would have happened. Yeah. He cannot do it himself, and neither can you. If the vision you believe that God has given you, you can just solve yourself with the resources you have and with your time and energy, then it might be a great thing and maybe you should do it, but it's probably not a God thing. God is going to use other people to resource the vision that he's given you. The success of your vision will come through your relationships. What God is asking of you, he's resourcing others. And my favorite example of this comes straight from the Bible. It comes from the book of 2 Kings. So we're going to rewind. This is not during the time of the wall being rebuilt. This is rewinding all the way back to the time of the kings in Israel, right? So we're going back to this story, and there's a widow who has just lost her husband. And her widow had been a prophet, and this was during the time of Elisha, the prophet. So her husband would have been in community with Elisha. And her husband passes away, and he had outstanding debts, and a lot of them. So here is a woman who has no income, no means of getting income, and nothing that she sees of value. And she has 2 young boys, and her boys are going to be taken as collateral for her husband's debts. And so she comes, she doesn't know what to do. She probably is crying and praying and asking God, and God says, go to your relationships. Who do you know? She said, okay, I know Elisha. He's pretty powerful. He's done some pretty awesome stuff. I'm going to go to him. So she goes to Elisha, and he looks at her, and he says, what do you have? Which is God's favorite question. He comes to us and he says, what do you have that we can use here? And what we have is never enough. And she probably wanted to look at him and be like, I have nothing, that's why I'm here. I came to you because I don't have anything. And she thinks about it, and she's like, well, I have a little bit of oil, just a little bit. And Elijah's like, bingo, we can work with that. But oil would have been the most natural thing she had in her kitchen. Every single woman had oil and flour in their kitchen. That's what they had. That's what they kept, right? But it did have value. So she had a little bit of oil, and he was like, great, we're going to work with that. And she's probably thinking, that is not enough. It's not going to help me. If it was enough, I would have used it first. But he says, no. I want you to go around. Look at Elijah at 2 Kings 4:3. Elijah says, go around to all your neighbors for empty jars and ask all your neighbors for empty jars, and don't just ask for a few. He says, go knock on their doors, say, hey, can I have your jars? And so she did. So she went and knocked on her neighbor's doors, and she got all the jars she could, and she brought all the jars home, and she took her oil, and she poured it in one jar, and she set it aside, and she poured it in one jar, and she set it aside, and she poured it. And that was crazy because it was like the Mary Poppins bag. The jar of oil just never ended until all of the jars were filled. The miracle of multiplication happened when she started trusting God and pouring the oil into the jars. She took all those jars and she sold them. And that was the money that she used to pay off the debts and to live off of for her and her sons for the rest of their days. The quantity, the measure of her blessing was directly proportional to her relationships. The amount of valuable oil she could get was directly related to the amount of people she could knock on their door and ask for jars. Every jar represented the community she had built. It represented how she had poured into other people's lives. So what about you? Who is your community? Who are your people? If you had to go knock on someone's door and ask for a jar, whose door would you go knock on? Or maybe a cup or something different. I don't know. If people have jars around their house, I don't know. Mason jars are cool. What God is asking of you, he's resourced in others. And this is true in the story of Nehemiah. It began with Nehemiah's brother. Nehemiah's brother helped him to have the vision for the rebuilding of the wall. You see, Nehemiah hadn't even gone there to see the ruins. Nehemiah's brother came to him and he said, hey, the wall is breaking down. And so that's how Nehemiah got his vision. And then Nehemiah went to King Artaxerxes and he said, after years of relationship with King Artaxerxes, he said, man, my heart is broken for Jerusalem. And King Artaxerxes resourced him. That king, he had such a positive relationship with Nehemiah that he let him leave the castle. He let him oversee the project. He made him the governor of the area. And then he funded the project with his own resources. He basically said, stop by Home Depot. I put in a mobile order, and you can get all your stones and all your wood and all that you need there. And by the way, swing by Lowe's right after that because all the handles that are going to be on the gates, they're over there too, right? He told him to go get all of this stuff. He sent him instructions of where to go to get the resources that they needed for the wall. God resourced the vision through his relationships. And then Nehemiah got there, and now he had a vision and he had resources, but he realized that he needed more people. He still couldn't build the wall, just him and his brother. So now his ability to lead was related to his ability to inspire people. So how do good leaders inspire people? There's 3 ways. Good leaders inspire people by inviting, empowering, and sacrificing for them. Nehemiah invited. Nehemiah 2 shows us the invitation. Basically, Nehemiah gathers all the people of Jerusalem. He gathers them together. He says, hey, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. He's like, you guys, open your eyes. You can see all the rubble on the ground. You can see the walls falling down. And its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let's rebuild the wall, and we will no longer be in disgrace. And then I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. He said, look, the evidence of God working in us is the fact that I came here with my carload of Home Depot and Lowe's supplies, right? And they looked at it and they're like, you're right. It's clear that God is in this. So they said, let's start rebuilding. And they began this good work. So Nehemiah invited the people. They said yes. It felt like a victory. But I want to tell you something. If you go back and you read Nehemiah 2, not everybody said yes. In fact, the people in his social group, his peer group, some of the nobles specifically said no. And as a leader, I want to warn you not to get bogged down right here. Don't get bogged down with those who say no. Can you imagine if in Jerry Maguire, Dorothy stands up and she comes and stands by him and he's like, okay, Dorothy, but we're not going to leave right now because I'm going to spend a little bit of time convincing the other people who said no to come along with us. Awkward, right? That would not have been a good idea. We don't want to do that. Great leaders work with those who God has given them without being distracted by those who don't. Right? We got to work with the people God has given us. Nehemiah did a really good job not being distracted by the people that said no and not being discouraged. Look, somebody's going to say no, and it doesn't make them bad. It doesn't even make them wrong. They just might not be meant to go on this journey with you. Don't let that be a distraction. So, what about you? Who are your people? And I recognize that you might be sitting here and you're thinking, I have a blank page. I don't know who my people are. And if that's you, I want to encourage you that your first step is also an invitation, but it's going to look a little bit different. Your invitation isn't going to be for what breaks your heart or for resources, for things that you need to complete the vision that God has given you. If your page is blank, then your first invitation is for a coffee or a walk or a conversation. Like, you want to build community right now, not try to build someone on a mission with you. So start small. Have a conversation. Build a relationship. Invite someone into your community. And also, treat people the way that you want to be treated, or treat them better. If you're thinking, man, nobody treats me the way that I want to be treated, well, just start treating them that way and see what happens. Start small. Nehemiah invited, many said yes, and he was ready to begin. So he started the project. The second thing great leaders do to inspire people is that they empower people. The chapter 3 of Nehemiah is the greatest story of empowerment. I can't read it all to you right now because if I did, it would take too long and you guys would all laugh at my pronunciation of all the names. So we're not going to read it all, but you can go back and read it yourself. But Nehemiah empowered. Here's what he said. He invited all the family units to get together in their households. Most of the families lived across from the gate. So he said, you're in charge of the area in front of your house and a little bit more. So this family would build the area in front of their house and go to here. And then this family would start here and build in front of their house and go here. And it continued all the way along the wall. Brilliant, right? And if you didn't have a family home against the wall, you cleared rubble, you shaped stones, you helped rebuild the gates. Everyone had meaningful work to do. And the work was specific. They had specific jobs to do. I mean, we can forget the importance of specificity. In my home, if I said, all right, guys, it's morning time, I need the vacuuming done, the dusting done, bathrooms clean, the porch swept, do you think it would get done? All my people would be like, great, sounds great, someone should do that, right? But if I sat down and said, hey, I need you, I won't name my children out right now, to do this chore, right? This is why we have job responsibilities. And we can say, we can get crazy with this too. We can think that more options are better as leaders. We can think, okay, if I just make that chore list longer, then someone's going to find something they like. But this is really misguided. It's like the cheesecake versus In-N-Out fallacy, right? You go to the Cheesecake Factory and you're like, oh, I'm so hungry. And you walk in and you get the menu and you're like, wow, it's the Bible. It's so thick. And you're looking through it. You're like, I don't even know what category of food I want today. But that would never happen at In-N-Out, right? We walk in, I'm like, I know exactly what I want. I want a cheeseburger, and I want it animal style, and I want fries, and a vanilla shake, absolutely, 100%, right? We all have our In-N-Out order. We walk in, we're like, oh, we've got this, right? Because specificity leads to the work being done. Great leaders give specific job responsibilities. As a leader, when you're too general, it means you're not really asking anything. Nehemiah didn't do that. He gave a specific job to each person, allowing those who had said yes to do the work. And then he didn't micromanage them. He didn't have to watch every single stone be laid, because when you do that, the work is slow and uninspired. He gave them the freedom, the creativity, and ingenuity. Great leaders empower other people to do the work. So he empowered and he encouraged them, he supported the work, and now the work was moving more quickly and efficiently. And then the third thing that Nehemiah did to inspire people that great leaders do is he sacrificed. This is a big one. Nehemiah made sacrifices for those he was leading. Adversity came, hardship came, and it will when you're a leader. And he made sacrifices for those he was leading. He sacrificed efficiency, he sacrificed his own finances, and he sacrificed his relationships. Nehemiah did something that all great leaders do. He listened. The people came to him with their first concern. The first concern was the threats of the other nations. And he listened to them. He didn't say, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. God's going to protect us. It's fine, right? He listened. He heard their concerns. And last week we talked about how Nehemiah stayed on the wall when the other nations were trying to distract him. He said, I have a great work to do. I can't come down. But in this moment, he comes down because great leaders know when to listen and when to ignore. Right? He knew that these outside people who weren't part of the project, they were just a distraction. But his people that he was leading, he listened to. They're not a distraction. They're worth listening to. It's a big deal. So he prayed, and then he pivoted like we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. He prayed and then he pivoted. He said, okay, we're going to change the strategy. Instead of everybody working, we're going to do half of the men are going to be building the wall outside of the area. And then the other half, you're going to have your weapons and be ready to fight. And you're also going to carry materials with you. I don't know how that worked, like sword in hand, carrying stone, but it's great. I'm sure they did a great job. Nehemiah sacrificed the project's efficiency to address the people's safety. It was important. He valued the people he led, and he responded to their concerns. And so the work could continue. And then the second big obstacle came up. The second obstacle was way bigger than the first. The people were in extreme poverty. This was a significant and long-term problem. They were crushed under the weight of poverty. These were agrarian people, so they were farmers. They had left their farms to come and help and build the wall. So that's an issue because they can't be farming right now. But this issue had been going on for a really long time. So they had lived through fires and burning and famine, and they had lived through imperial taxes from both Persia and Babylon before that. and they were struggling under the weight of poverty. It was a major issue. They had taken a real financial hit to come here and do the work. And just that would have been enough. But with all these past histories, it was debilitating. And they were like, we just can't do it anymore. Our wives and children are starving at home. We need to go help. And so Nehemiah said, you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to sacrifice to take the burden away from you. So as the standing governor of this area, and he did this because leaders sacrificed first. As the standing governor of this area, he was owed money, he was owed the land, and he was owed a food supply, kind of daily food supply. Nehemiah said, I'm not going to take any of these three things. So he forewent all that was owed to him to relieve the burden on the people. He sacrificed his own finances because he was willing to listen to them. And then, in addition to not taking anything in, I'm going to pull up this passage. It's Nehemiah 5:17-18. It's kind of long. I'm going to read it, though. Okay? Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those others who came from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me. And every 10 days, an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor because the demands were heavy on these people. So what is this saying? It's saying, from his bank account, he took large sums of money to order in really nice catering from Spruzzo's every day for everybody. And then every 10 days, he had a sommelier deliver wine to his house, right? All of this came from his own resources, and he didn't take anything to replenish that. Every day, he had 150 people in his house, and I think I host a lot. Wow, that's a lot. And he did this. Why? Because good leaders give more than they take. He sacrificed his own assets. He sacrificed what was owed to him, and he sacrificed to give this away. And then he leveraged his relationships, because even this wasn't enough for the people. They really needed this burden lifted. And he wasn't the only one who was owed money from them. There were all these other governors that were owed money from them. So he leveraged his own relationships. He brought in all the other nobles. And he said, guys, we need to take away the burden of these people. Do you remember in Leviticus? I'm not saying that you remember, but he would say to them, do you remember in Leviticus, it says you're not supposed to take interest from your own people. So he called them to act with integrity. And that was a hard ask. These were his peers, his social group, his people. And he was asking them to raise their standard and not receive their own financial windfall. And guess what? Those people listened. And I think they listened because they saw the example that Nehemiah was setting. He set that example. He sacrificed first. And so they listened. And in Nehemiah 5:12, it says, they responded and they said, we will give it back. And we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Nehemiah called them to act with integrity, and they did. He was not afraid to ask, and we shouldn't be either. But we don't love to ask, do we? I mean, it's inconvenient for us. We don't want to inconvenience someone else. We also don't want to, we don't want to mess with our relationships. We don't want to tell other people how to live their life. But great leaders really aren't afraid to ask. If you have that relationship with someone, then you get to lead forward with your sacrifice, and you get to ask those hard questions. So Nehemiah did that. It proved that Nehemiah's influence was proportional to his vision. How often are we willing to put our relationships on the line to help those we lead? That's a good question. Nehemiah invited, he empowered, and he sacrificed for people. He sacrificed efficiency, finances, and friendships to see this project through. What God asked of Nehemiah, he resourced in others. And because of this, Nehemiah was successful. You guys, the wall was built. Let's give it a round of applause. Okay. This is our audience participation moment, and our band can come up as we talk about this. All right, we've spent 4 weeks talking about the wall. We've talked about the obstacles. We've talked about the vision. We've talked about all that was needed. We've talked about the threats that came in. We've talked about all the rubble on the ground. We've talked about the resources needed. How long do you guys think, and if you know, keep your mouth shut, you Bible geniuses. How long did it take to rebuild the wall? Someone guess. Okay, Cardiff. 30 years. That's a good guess. 30 years. In the Bible, it's usually like, 14. We like numbers of 7, so like maybe 28 years. Okay, we're close to that. 30 years. Anyone else have any guesses? 14 years. That would have been a good amount of time too. It's in the 7. It took 52 days, you guys. 52 days to rebuild the wall. Because of God's provision and Nehemiah's leadership. You guys, this is a world record. Nehemiah 6:16 says, when our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid. They lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work could only have been done with the help of God. Only 52 days. Why? Because of God. And Nehemiah was listening to him. What God is asking of you, he's resourced in other people. So let's go back to the very first question. Who are your people? It's essential that you figure this out so you're not trying to lead only to find yourself taking a solo stroll. Before you lay your head down tonight on your pillow, I want you to literally get out a journal, get out a piece of paper, write down, who are your people? Maybe those people are in your family or your neighborhood or your workplace or your favorite coffee shop. They might be believers, they might not. It doesn't matter. King Artaxerxes wasn't, and he was the biggest resourcer of the project. And then you can consider how you can inspire them, just as Nehemiah did. You have a great work to do. God has invited you. God has empowered you through the resources of others, and God has made the sacrifice for you. And that's why you can make the sacrifice for others. What God is asking of you, he's resourced in your people. So my question is, who are your people? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you that you use others to resource us, even though sometimes we just want to do things all on our own. We thank you that you used all those people in Nehemiah's life to rebuild the wall in 52 days, and that we can look at in awe. We thank you for the example of Nehemiah's leadership. And Lord, I ask that you help us to look in our hearts and really that you would raise to mind who are our people. And if we're not even sure about who they are, Lord, I pray that you would give us vision and wisdom to figure out who do we need to invite to become a person of ours. Lord, we thank you that you have chosen us as your people, that you invite us in, that you empower us, and that you made the sacrifice, the greatest sacrifice of all time for us. Let us love others because of that. In your name, amen.